Karl Tanzler was born in Dresden in 1877. After graduating from medical school, World War I had just broken out, and he ended up in an internment camp. When the war was over, he was released, but was not allowed to stay in the country because of this, so he relocated to Holland and then later moved to the United States. Many reports state that prior to this, Tanzler was married and had 2 children, all of which he abandoned during his immigration. Tanzler was said to have a relatively normal childhood, aside from his claim that the ghost of one of his relatives would visit him often. According to Tanzler, he had visions of a dark-haired young woman who was supposed to become the love of his life. In 1927, Tanzler got a job as an X-ray technician in the Marine Hospital on Key West. During his time there, he would meet a patient by the name of Elena de Hoyos. Accounts show that Elena led a normal life of a teenager in the 1920s. She was a devout Catholic who enjoyed Rudolph Valentino movies, cooking for family and friends, dancing at the social club La Brisa, and looking forward to the technological developments of the 1930s. She was said to be extremely beautiful, shy, and an accomplished singer, to the point where tourists would ask for pictures with her in the street. At 16, she was married to Luis Mesa, and they were expecting their first child. Unfortunately, this would be the beginning of many tragedies for Elena. She miscarried her child with Luis and gradually fell ill with a cough. Her family initially assumed that the illness was from the sadness due to the loss of her child, but the cough was not getting better over time. Luis would leave Elena at this time. Elena was sent in with terminal tuberculosis when she met Tanzler for the first time. He immediately fell in love with her and was determined to save her life. Elena's family was initially concerned at first, as they were too poor to afford any hospital payments, but Tanzler worked with Elena free of any charges. He tried many different remedies. Sources describe them as potions and tinctures. Tanzler also reportedly administered painful treatments using a device that included electrodes, believing that charging her oxygen electrons with electrodes could possibly cure her. Everything was seeming to fail, however, so Tanzler would shower Elena with gifts and expressed his love towards her often. He went as far as to ask Elena's family if he could marry her. Each proposal was met with negative reactions. Elena herself made it clear that she was not interested in any sort of relationship with Tanzler. Elena's family had instructed Tanzler to stay away following these marriage proposals, and also because of their dislike of his unorthodox devil machines used by him in his treatments of Elena. The family would eventually move and not tell Tanzler the location of their new residence. Tanzler was undeterred, however, and searched the streets every night until a sympathetic neighbor told him of their new location. The family, considering Elena was fatally ill at this point, conceded. Elena de Hoyos would die on October 25, 1931. Tanzler would make a unique request, insisting on paying for the funeral, complete with a large mausoleum. Elena's family consented, but they weren't aware that Tanzler alone had the key to the mausoleum. Elena was embalmed and then interred. After this interment, Tanzler would visit Elena's grave on a nightly basis. He left gifts and even had a telephone installed in her tomb. He continued with visits with Elena over the next 2 years. During this period in time, Tanzler was fired from his job at the hospital for unknown reasons. During the following years, Tanzler would become increasingly distant. He would be seen purchasing women's clothing and perfumes. A neighbor even saw him dancing with what appeared to be a life-size doll through Tanzler's window. He stopped visiting Elena's grave eventually, and rumors spread that he was living with the corpse. These rumors would eventually reach Elena's sister, Florinda. She would visit Tanzler and confront him about taking her body. In response, Tanzler would start making statements such as, "Elena is an angel, but not you. You never looked after her over the past 9 years. She has been under my care. I have paid for all of the expenses, not you. I own the tomb and everything inside of it." Tanzler admitted that he broke into the tomb in April of 1933 and used his car to transport her body back to his home. Over the next several years, Tanzler worked hard to preserve the decaying body as best as he could. This leads to some of the more extreme theories about Tanzler's relationship with Elena's body. Many believe he would partake in the act of necrophilia. In the ancient world, many sailors returning corpses to their home country were often accused of necrophilia. Singular accounts of necrophilia in history are sporadic, but the written records suggest that the practice was present within ancient Egypt. To discourage intercourse with a corpse, the ancient Egyptians left deceased beautiful women to decay for 3 or 4 days before giving them to the embalmers. Acts of necrophilia are also depicted on ceramics from Peruvian culture. A common theme in these artifacts is the masturbation of a male skeleton by a living woman. An autopsy report of Elena's body exposed all of Tanzler's extensive modifications. To maintain Elena's body shape, Tanzler used coat hangers, wires, and stuffed her torso with rags. He used plaster to reconstruct her face, which he touched up with mortician's wax. He replaced her eyes with glass ones. After her hair fell out, Tanzler would make a makeshift wig which he stapled to her head. He even used her real hair, some of which was provided by Elena's mother, who gave it to Tanzler after her death. To cover the smell of decay, he used perfume, flowers, disinfectants, and preserving agents. The creepiest and most disturbing detail, however, was a tube inserted into her reproductive organ. Most sources agree that Tanzler never confessed to committing necrophilia, and there was reportedly no evidence that there was any post-mortem intercourse. However, some believe that an autopsy report found cotton at the end of the tube containing remnants of sperm. Despite this, it has been confirmed that Tanzler did keep Elena in his bed, dressed up and complete with jewelry. When Tanzler took Elena's remains to his home, he restored her in a makeshift laboratory that he'd built. This laboratory was built in the shape of an airplane, which Tanzler called Elena's airship. Tanzler's plan was to eventually use the plane to bring Elena back to life. According to All That's Interesting, Tanzler thought that he could fly her high into the stratosphere so that radiation from outer space could penetrate her tissues and restore life to her somnolent form. Tanzler was deemed fit to stand trial after psychiatric evaluation. He was charged with destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. However, the charges were dropped since the statute of limitations had expired. After the arrest, the public's reaction was sympathetic. By all accounts, Tanzler wasn't viewed with disdain, but instead with pity. He was seen as lonely. Women even called him an eccentric romantic. According to legend, until his death in 1952, Tanzler kept a full-sized wax doll with Elena's likeness, including a plaster cast of her face. Some theorists have said that Tanzler, being a much older man and in love with a young girl, was afraid that Elena was not dying fast enough. In response, he devised a plan to be with her for eternity. Tanzler would reportedly do this by poisoning her over time in order to kill her quicker so that he could have her all to himself. After Tanzler was caught in the act, Elena's preserved body was put on funeral display in an effort to compensate for her post-mortem mistreatment. It's estimated that roughly 7,000 people came to see her. The story of her demise and twisted tale of love seemingly launched her into a celebrity status. Eventually, she was reburied in an unmarked grave, her body encased in cement to keep the doctor from ever interfering with her body again. Prior to this, a young boy who got to see Elena's body on display was utterly shocked by what he saw before him. He said, "I have never been able to forget this vision. She didn't even look like a human anymore. So much reconstruction and decay. It was the scariest thing I had ever seen. Her face was a questionable white that looked more like a wax dummy than a woman's face, and she had horrible glass eyes, black and fixed. I still dream of this show. Tanzler would move to another part of Florida with Elena 2.0 and was supported by his wife, who had left decades before. His autobiography, where he spoke lovingly of Elena and their deep love for one another, was published in the pulp fiction publication Fantastic Adventures. Carl Tanzler was found dead at home in 1952 at age 75. There were mixed reports about his death. Some said that he was found in the arms of his remade corpse bride, while others claimed that the strange wax doll was hidden under a shroud nearby, and no one could ever be sure that it wasn't Elena, freshly exhumed and preserved once again for his pleasure.